What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Cricut Ovation 3 and the Cricut Icon 4. Now before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either phone individually, I will be linking to several other videos about each of them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Cricut Ovation 3, we're getting a really large 6.82-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 246, and an aspect ratio of 20.5 by 9. With the Cricut Icon 4, we're getting a 6.5-inch IPS LCD display. This phone also has a 720p resolution, a PPI of 269, and an aspect ratio of 20 by 9. So in pretty much every way, as far as the image quality goes at least, these displays are pretty much identical. Same resolution, same display technology, and in general, for what they are, I would say both of them do look decently good. That being said though, clearly here, the Cricut Ovation 3 is quite a bit larger, at 6.82 inches versus 6.5. So if you're really going to be on your phone a lot, especially doing things like watching videos for example, you will probably get a better experience with the Cricut Ovation 3. And with an aspect ratio of 20.5 by 9 versus 20 by 9, the Cricut Ovation 3 also has a slightly taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something like watching a video in landscape mode for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience. And if you're doing something like reading or using social media, with the taller and more narrow form factor, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So in general, again, if you're going to be on your phone a lot, you will get a slightly better experience with the Cricut Ovation 3. And another thing to consider here is that with the Cricut Ovation 3, despite the advantages of having such a huge display, this phone is also quite a bit bulkier, and some people might prefer something a little bit more compact. So if that's you, then keep in mind, the Cricut Icon 4 is a lot smaller, so if you don't want to get a phone that's too big, this might be a better choice. Now for storage, both phones are getting 32GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, which honestly in my opinion is pretty unfortunate, because in this day and age, 32GB is really not a lot of space. Sure, if you only have a handful of apps, and you're really not doing a whole lot with your phone, then it's probably going to be at least acceptable. But honestly, even for the average user, with stuff like the system, apps, and just files in general getting larger and larger, 32GB will fill up pretty quickly. So if you're constantly downloading apps, especially stuff like games that tend to take up a little bit more space, then you're probably going to want to get a different device that has more storage. But if you are a really light user, and you don't really use very many apps, then especially with a microSD card, either phone will probably at least be okay. Now for security features, both phones do have Face Unlock, and they also both have fingerprint scanners right here on the back. So definitely nice to get two options here. But starting with the Ovation 3, let's go ahead and give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Icon 4. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners did work real well. And again, both phones do have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now for the camera setups here, with the Ovation 3, we got a water drop notch for the front-facing camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra-wide camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. With the Cricut Icon 4, we got another water drop notch on the front-facing camera. This camera is 5 megapixels. And then on the back, we got a single rear camera, and this camera is 13 megapixels. So in general, as far as features go, the Cricut Ovation 3 with a triple camera setup does have quite a bit more features than the Icon 4. So in general, if you're taking a lot of pictures and you want a wider variety of features, the Ovation 3 is definitely going to have an advantage. And when it comes to actual photo quality, despite these phones both having 13 megapixel main cameras, I would say in general, the Cricut Ovation 3 does take slightly better photos. So overall, if you are taking more photos, especially stuff you might want to share, maybe on social media for example, between the two, the Cricut Ovation 3 will be a better choice. That being said, with the Icon 4, while it really doesn't have a ton of features, the photo quality is at least decent. So if you want to get a couple nice photos here and there, but you're really not using the camera a whole lot, it will still at least get the job done. Now as far as the RAM and processor go, with the Cricut Ovation 3, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A25 processor. With the Cricut Icon 4, we're getting 3GB of RAM as well with the MediaTek Helio A22. So in general, between the two, as far as performance goes, I definitely would say the Cricut Ovation 3 is noticeably faster, but keep in mind, neither phone is really meant for heavy use. So if you're going to be on your phone a lot, especially doing more high performance activities like mobile gaming for example, in that case you're probably going to want something a little bit higher end that's just faster in general. But for more light use and basic activities, both phones will at least get the job done. But again, between the two, the Cricut Ovation 3, while definitely still not being a fast phone per se, is still significantly faster than the Cricut Icon 4. Now in case you're wondering, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both phones, and here are the scores I got. So again, as you can see here, sure on one hand, the Cricut Ovation 3 is really not super fast or anything, but compared to the Cricut Icon 4, it is still quite a bit faster. So if you do sort of care about performance, but you're still really not going to be on your phone a whole lot, the Cricut Ovation 3 is definitely going to have an advantage. But again, for really light occasional use and more basic activities like web browsing, social media, stuff like that, despite the Ovation 3 being a lot faster, either phone will at least get the job done. For the batteries, these phones are actually exactly the same, both getting 4000 mAh batteries supporting 10-watt fast charging, so on one hand, maybe not the best batteries out there, but for most people they will get the job done. And in general, as long as you're not going to be on your phone all day, the battery life you get with these phones will at least be enough for normal use. As far as the software goes, both phones do have Android 12, so that's definitely a nice thing to see. Sure, it's not Android 13, but at this point at the end of 2022, not every new phone even has Android 13 yet, especially lower end phones like these, and considering a lot of entry-level phones still only have Android 11, I'm glad we're at least getting something decently newer here. That being said though, keep in mind, seeing as these are really low-end phones, they're probably not going to be getting any major updates, so if having the latest software is important to you, then you will want to go with something else. Now, one really cool thing about both phones is that these phones do actually have NFC, making them some of the cheapest phones I've ever seen that have this feature. In case you don't know what it is, NFC is the main technology behind contactless mobile payment services, so if you like to use tap and pay, you will need a phone with NFC. So if you are looking for a really entry-level phone, but you do like to use tap and pay, you'll be happy to know either phone will be able to use that feature just fine. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, in pretty much every way where there's a difference, the Cricket Ovation 3 is definitely a better device. This phone has a much larger display, and the dimensions are also slightly better, so if you're consuming a lot of content, this is definitely going to be a good thing. It also has a much better camera setup with both an ultra-wide camera and a macro camera, which is really something you don't see every day in a phone like this. Whereas with the Cricket Icon 4, again, there's only one camera here, so this phone has pretty much no features. And again, with the performance, while of course not being nearly as fast as a higher end device, with the Ovation 3, it is still significantly faster than the Icon 4. So in general, you are going to get a better experience no matter what you're doing. That being said though, for a really entry-level phone, the Icon 4 really isn't bad either. And again, if you want something a little bit more compact, then definitely keep in mind the Ovation 3, while giving you the benefits of having a huge display, is honestly a really bulky phone, and that's without a case. And with cheaper phones like this, I usually do recommend putting a case on them just because the materials aren't the most durable. So definitely keep in mind, with the case on, the Cricket Ovation 3 is going to be a really bulky phone, whereas with the Icon 4, it's definitely a lot more normal. So if that is a concern for you, then maybe the Icon 4 might actually be a better choice. And in addition to this, since the features are honestly pretty similar, depending on whatever deals Cricket ends up offering, if you can get one of them for free, I would probably just go with that one, because at the end of the day, well again, the Cricket Ovation 3 is a clearly better phone. I feel like the differences in general really aren't enough to justify paying a lot more for it. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for a really affordable entry-level phone that's really good for basic activities and not a whole lot more, then in general, either phone will get the job done just fine. Now again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, I will be linking to several other videos about each of them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.